So in February, I took a look at The Strangers and its sequel, Prey at Night. Two very good home invasion horror movies that are some of the best that the subgenre has to offer. Well, this month we were treated to the next movie in this franchise, subtitled Chapter 1. This is the first part of a trilogy that will be releasing over the course of the next 12 months, and boy, do I have some thoughts. As usual, this is a new movie, so alongside your usual visual reminder that there will be spoilers, here's me just letting you know that if you want to for some reason see this thing blind, click away and come back later. And with that out of the way, let's talk about The Strangers, Chapter 1. If I had to headline this movie with any one-word summary, it would be difficult, but I think the one that I'd probably eventually land on is disappointing. That's not even to say this thing is bad. I think it's fine and it's watchable and I enjoyed it, but compared to what the previous two had to offer on top of what this could have been, I can't help but feel just a little bit let down by what I've watched. First things first, I want to say that I'm fine with this feeling somewhat similar to the first in terms of structure, because going into this, we were made somewhat aware that this would be a reimagining of the first movie. And so to expect anything other than that, in my opinion, is stupid. Saying that, I do think the film struggles a little with the fact that it keeps its cards a little too close to its chest. I'm fine with it being structurally the same, but the issue is when it begins to feel the same too. And the stuff that does feel new doesn't look great. The two performances from the leads are alright, they're passable. I think they lacked a little chemistry, which doesn't help sell the fact that these two people are supposed to be in love. There were times in this movie where I didn't feel that as much as I was supposed to, and that was probably part of the reason why the ending didn't stick with me nearly as harshly as it has done before. I'm not sure that Madeleine Pesch, or however you say her surname, is going to convince a whole lot of people that she is capable of headlining a horror movie here either. It was a little difficult to take her seriously with that performance throughout the film, and I'm not going to rule out the fact that this could have been a script issue more than anything else, but she doesn't do a whole lot with what she has. Same goes for Froy Gutierrez, the male lead. I don't think he was great either. He was probably the worst of the two. The story follows Maya and Ryan as they travel across the country so that Maya can pursue a new job. When one of them gets hungry, I can't remember who, they end up stopping at a diner in some small town for something to eat, and that leads to car trouble, which then leads to the cabin being rented where the events of the film will take place. I do like this setup. It featured a lot of little moments that had me wondering whether or not the town was secretly connected with the killers, and while that sort of messes with the usual motive of these films, I would have welcomed that idea if it had been done right. In my eyes, they still don't exactly rule that idea out either, so I assume there's still a chance that it could be revisited in one of the upcoming chapters. I also like the decision to have the couple come without any real conflict this time. It does take away a little agency, and I won't deny that they feel a little one-dimensional at times, but I do appreciate the fact that we've now seen a couple that was in turmoil, a disrupted family, and now a couple that is completely fine and still in love with each other. It sort of harkens back to the fact that it doesn't matter what is going on in your life, shit can go wrong. I appreciate that we've got to see another type of relationship become disrupted by these killers. It's the one change that I do actually really understand and can justify existing in this film. The film also continues with that usual double meaning in the film's title, with the concept of the strangers being blurred yet again. Maya and Ryan are obviously intruding into a small community, aliens to all of the residents. We can see from the caginess and subdued hostility from a lot of the patrons in the diner that newcomers likely aren't overly welcomed or all that regular for that matter, making our two protagonists here this movie's strangers in a weird, convoluted way. Moving on to the characters, and look, there are a lot of really dumb decisions happening here, and yes, I will admit I was getting just a little bit pissed off throughout the movie. That being said, I'm never ever gonna let stupid horror characters ruin my enjoyment of a horror movie because they are integral to this genre. That's just what has to happen sometimes. In a movie series like this, where the killers have very much become what people are going to see rather than the survivors, it makes sense that these characters are going to make decisions in the movie that play into the killer's hands for the pleasure of the audience. Audiences revel in the fact in knowing that the killer is often one of the most smartest people in the room. Look at Friday the 13th for example, who is still watching that for the survivors. On top of that, let's be completely reasonable for a second because I want to rant. I see countless people criticising decisions made by characters here as if they have lived through these scenarios and know exactly how they would react and how they would cope and what they would do to see that they survive, and I want to say to that, just shut the fuck up. How are we supposed to realistically assume that these people here, who we have only known for about an hour of film time, are going to keep the level-headedness and rationale to be able to make competent decisions that lead to their survival? This is a traumatic ordeal. None of us are rational thinkers in that sort of thing. And you need to accept that. I'm getting sick of the whole perception that horror needs to have genius characters all the time that never crack and never show a hint of weakness or panic, because that's then when you go into the realm of unrealism. I've criticised this movie so far, and I'm going to continue to do so, but that's not a point that I'm willing to call a flaw. I think one of my biggest issues with this movie is that it just doesn't feel like a Stranger's movie. It has this really cheap digital aesthetic that bathes everything in this unappealing look, and it makes it all feel just a little too safe and clean. Part of the power that the original and its sequel holds is that they feel raw, they're close and intense and filled with this brutality that this newest installment just doesn't have. There's a polish here that removes so much tension and impact from a lot of what we're seeing, and it really harms that final product. It relies heavily on jump scares to the point where it just feels overdone and obnoxious, to be honest. There's a level of discomfort here that rides purely on how many cheap and repetitive sudden noises are thrown at us rather than being built on true tension. There's nothing here that suggests an organic build-up of suspense. It's all artificial, created through meaningless sound effects and lackluster attempts to scare us. On top of that, the way that it tries to tie the strangers to some sort of religious subtext really doesn't sit right with me. Perhaps I've missed moments in the other two movies where they do this, or perhaps I'm a little hypocritical because I said a few minutes ago that I'd be fine with them messing with the motives a little bit. But I really don't like that the whole thing could be whittled down to sinners get punished, because that takes away from the sporadic nature of these killings. If they then work that back into it is the town that's being connected and this is why they do it, I suppose in this separated strangers universe, which I will distance from the actual good ones, then I suppose it could work. For context here as well, just so people, in case people didn't notice it, I'm talking about the points where Maya and Ryan are blasted by the patrons in the diner because of the fact that they're an unmarried couple, or when they're constantly being thrown pamphlets in their faces. I'm thinking when they're in the diner, and also when Ryan goes to get tacos or quesadillas or whatever it is that he gets. It's as though the film is trying to throw over this message that if you're a sinner, you're getting targeted by these strangers. And again, in this continuity, maybe that's a thing, but in terms of everything that we know about these characters so far, that doesn't really work. So until we see otherwise, it's a problem. There's also just a tad too much in terms of trying to emulate the original for me. While I'm appreciative and I'm understanding that again this is a reimagining, I think they did need to try to be a little braver here. From the axe being thrown through the door to the hello mural in the doorway, the film has a lot of moments that are ripped straight from the original, and it feels more copycat than inspired. Look, I know it might sound like it, but I actually don't hate this movie. I think it's incredibly flawed, and it misses the chance to be a complete reinvention for this series, and it also misses the chance to take on more of that 90s inspiration that I was hoping it would, but I enjoyed it enough to say that I at least want to finish this trilogy. I don't know, man, maybe it's just me. Maybe I have seen that many actually bad horror movies that the one that general audiences pick up on and call bad, I'm here thinking it's pretty good. There's for sure an overreaction to this thing, and I think that comes naturally with the genre. I always notice that with general audiences, and critics especially, there's an element of bias against horror in a lot of instances, where it seems to get a harder go of things. But yeah, I guess I like The Strangers Chapter 1. Is there a lot I would change? Of course. The acting is forgetful, the writing is bland, the visuals are uninspired and look cheap, and yet it's tense enough, it's well structured enough to make me want to at least see the other two chapters, and who knows, maybe the next two knock it out of the park and this thing is just suffering from being the start of an incomplete story. Or, maybe my interest in seeing this through comes from the previous movies, and I hope that this trilogy can turn things around. I guess we'll find out later this year. I just feel that with all of the flaws and problems that I've listed in the movie that definitely outweigh the stuff that I did actually enjoy, I did still have a good time with this thing. I walked out of the movie after the credits thinking that I got something out of this, and given the chance, I probably would watch it again. Horror movies like this are funny, man. You can have so many problems with one, but the minute it does the slightest thing to itch just one interest you've got, you can give it a 6 out of 10 and move on with your life. And so that is The Strangers Chapter 1, a new trilogy coming from Rennie Harlin that will be releasing over the course of the next 12 months. I know my thoughts on this movie might sound a little confusing, honestly. You know, I've sat and talked about how bad it is, and then I just turned around at the end and went, I like this thing, it's pretty good. Really, when I was writing this though, I didn't feel like I enjoyed this movie, or this movie fucking sucked, were really a good way to convey my real thoughts on this thing because of how confused I felt myself. And so I figured to blend them together and just do both. It was probably the best thing to do. I'm also really intrigued to see if this video ends up performing better than the previous Strangers video that I did a couple of months ago, because if it doesn't, then I'm not covering chapter 2 and 3. I can't do that to myself again. All joking aside, if you do want to see more content from me and you enjoyed this one, then leave a like and subscribe so that you don't miss it when it drops. If you're interested in seeing my thoughts on the two infinitely better versions of this movie, then you can go and check that out on the channel. It came out in February, and I will leave a link to that in the description below, and it's probably somewhere above my head as well. I really like it, and I think it deserves a little more love than what it actually got. With all that being said, my name has been Media13, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.